investigate. Okay, so let's kick into this. So we've seen some alarming things happen over the last few weeks, and what I want to do, I don't want to focus too much on the details on that today. I want to start with a high overview. Okay, many of you are talking about Bill Gates and the connections. So just to clarify right there, we all know that Bill Gates is a crook. He's very much of the Dr. Evil ilk. For those of you who saw the Austin Powers movies, he's the classic billionaire criminal. Okay, so let's just get that off straight away. And also, when you examine the connections between Bill Gates, okay, and you start to unravel his connections, you start to get a sense that there's something not right here. For example, if we look at Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is Trump's medical advisor and head of the coronavirus response team for Trump, well, we know that Dr. Fauci is also a criminal as well. Why? Because, of course, it's come out now that he's been, through his National Institute of Health in the US and the Agency for Infectious Diseases, he's funded the Wuhan lab, gave them $3.7 million of American taxpayer money to China back in 2015, and to help basically form a weaponized version of the coronavirus. But the interesting thing about that, of course, is that people are starting to talk about that. Trump's referenced it. But of course, the beginnings of that research started in Fort Detrick in North Carolina, and that was substantiated by Dr. Judy Mikovits in the last few weeks, who's gained a great profile online for blowing the lid on the corruption within the CDC, of course, which is the Center for Disease Control, which regulates the pharmaceutical industry, pretty much like the FDA. I mean, what they said is a benchmark that goes all around the world, okay, and that's also a criminal organisation as well. So we're not doing too good here when we start examining those organisations. But I do want to start at the very very high level about what we're dealing with here and where it's kind of funneled into a very narrow channel of events to where we've head to now. Now, this plan that we're talking about ultimately involves a global plan to bring the entire world into a global system. Some call it the New World Order, some call it the One World System. It's all pretty much the same thing. But we need to examine what the goals are of this system, and it's something that I began to look at way back in 2001. If I can cast your mind to where I was in 2001, sitting down in Waiuru at the military intelligence course that they put me on, one of the topics that they gave me to write a thesis on and do a presentation on was on the geopolitical and geo-religio conflict between Judeo-Christian world and the Islamic world, starting with the 1962 Yemeni uprising. So that was a very nice light topic to start with. And when I started to go into studying the dynamics between the friction between the Judeo-Christian world and Islam, I noticed, a whole bunch of things that just didn't kind of add up. 9/11 had happened. Okay, this is a few months after 9/11, but this was going back to 1962, and it really did put me on a course to examine why and how the conflict and the friction between the Islamic East and the Christian West, shall we say, began. But this one world system that we're now seeing and getting a sense of that is materializing before us, it's really about a central control of all populations. Now, I know a lot of you out there that are listening to this would have heard of Agenda 30, and Agenda 30, we're going to talk a little bit more as we go on. But this one world system is about a central control of all populations. It's about controlling all of the issues that affect I guess that sustain life, that are involved for us to have a life in a society, any kind of society. So this system will control everything, absolutely everything, so that you can't move unless you've got an approval to do that or a permit, okay, which we'll get into that. It's also some of the other parts of it that are going to come into play is that they will control the weather, okay. So those of you that know about geoengineering, which isn't a conspiracy, it's a fact, geoengineering, you'll know that that's part of the weather control system, and that's also a very important ingredient that they need to have in their pot of control, because it controls the food chain and the ability for populations to grow their own food. We're also talking about a system that will control education. We're also talking about a one world financial system. We're talking about a global military system as well. To those of my brethren that's from the army that went on UN peacekeeping deployments, I never got there. I was picked twice to go on them, and both times I had higher ranks take my job off me. But to those that went on these UN peace missions, they looked almost ineffective. Okay, we're going back now to the late 90s and early 2000s. It was almost a situation where they were really just there for show, really. If you talk to some of the soldiers that went on the Yugoslavia rotation during the Baltic wars that were over there, they were really in a really tough situation where the peacekeepers basically got threatened as well, as much as the civilian population. So they're really observers, and they weren't really able to interfere. But those of us who have examined what's happening with the UN and the framework around how the military can be used today, it's a much, much different story. They now have the legal framework to be able to go into countries and do a lot more in terms of coping with the rules of engagement that a peacekeeping force would normally have. That's all been eradicated. They basically removed all the barriers that would prevent the UN to deploy literally a global police force to go into sovereign countries and act on behalf of the UN. Okay, we're also talking about a one legal framework. So we're talking about a one system of law for everybody around the world, regardless of what your own country's legal system says. Your country will sign up to a legal framework. That's already happening. New Zealand's already signed up to many portions of it, which will go into it. And basically, this one world or one global legal system that's been set up right now means that there is no recourse for citizens in countries to go to their own governments and say, hey, we don't like this, we want something changed. Okay, that's basically been taken away from. That's going to be taken away from everyone on the planet, because it'll all be funneled into one legal system. So when citizens in a country have a problem with something, they can't just go to their council or go to their government and to the country's laws. They've got to go back through a central system. We're also talking about a one world religion as well. Many people will understand that all these other elements that we've talked about that are involved with controlling health and education and all those sorts of things. But when you say a one world religion or a one world spirituality, people don't really understand how that plays into this. But we'll go into that more as we go into this presentation today. But it's intriguing, and it's very interesting to understand really that the UN, despite the fact that it talks about uniting everybody so we can do better trade and be better cousins and whānau in the world, it's actually all based on a spirituality. And it's not a spirituality when you get stuck into it. That's a very, very good one, and we'll talk more about that as well. And so when you talk about these one